The illusion of the EU as a counterbalance to the US, manipulation, economic fallout, and the road to war. The European Union was presented to the public as a necessary economic and political counterweight to the United States. The idea was that by uniting European economies, the continent could stand on equal footing with the dominant US dollar and global influence of America. However, this vision was far from the reality that unfolded. European leaders such as François Mitterrand, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, Helmut Kohl, and Helmut Schmidt used this argument to manipulate their populations into compliance, selling them a dream of economic stability and geopolitical strength, while failing to disclose the hidden costs and external influences shaping the EU's trajectory. The United Kingdom, in contrast, made the shrewd decision to retain the British pound, avoiding many of the economic pitfalls that came with the euro's implementation. The EU and the economic deception. From its inception, the European Union was marketed as a means to prevent war, stabilize economies, and foster collaboration among European nations. However, behind the public rhetoric, its formation served the interests of elite power brokers who sought to centralize control over European economies. The Maastricht Treaty, 1992, officially laid the groundwork for the euro, with proponents claiming it would create a stable and competitive alternative to the US dollar. Yet, rather than fostering financial independence, the euro proved to be a tool for economic manipulation. The initial expectation was that the euro and the US dollar would hold equal value, reflecting the EU's supposed economic parity with the United States. However, this never materialized. Instead, the euro became overvalued by nearly 30% in comparison to the US dollar, distorting trade balances and making European exports less competitive on the global stage. Meanwhile, within the Eurozone, the economies of weaker nations such as Greece, Portugal, and Spain were subjected to financial hardships due to the monetary policies that favored stronger economies like Germany and France. The loss of monetary sovereignty meant that struggling nations could not devalue their currencies to regain competitiveness, further deepening their economic crises. The UK's smart move, rejecting the euro. The United Kingdom's refusal to adopt the euro stands as a testament to its foresight. By maintaining the British pound, the UK retained control over its monetary policy, shielding itself from the financial crises that plagued the Eurozone. This independence allowed the UK to respond more flexibly to economic fluctuations, avoiding the harsh austerity measures imposed by the European Central Bank on weaker Eurozone countries. The economic disadvantages of the euro became even more apparent during the 2008 financial crisis. While the US implemented aggressive monetary policies to stabilize its economy, Eurozone nations were shackled by a rigid monetary system that prioritized financial institutions over the welfare of European citizens. This led to a decade of economic stagnation, rising unemployment, and growing discontent among EU populations. The GATT and EU's fear of US dominance. European leaders were also deeply concerned about US dominance in global trade agreements, particularly within the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which later evolved into the World Trade Organization, WTO. Their fear was that without a strong economic bloc, individual European nations would be outmatched by American economic influence. However, their solution, centralizing economic policies under EU control, ended up weakening European nations rather than empowering them. By prioritizing bureaucratic centralization over economic adaptability, EU leaders placed their citizens in a precarious position. While they sought to protect European markets from American corporate dominance, they instead created an inefficient system that eroded the purchasing power of European citizens. The high valuation of the euro further exacerbated economic disparities, leaving European businesses struggling to compete with US firms in global markets. The road to the Ukraine war. As the EU's economic woes continued, geopolitical tensions with Russia intensified. The expansion of NATO and the EU's eastward push, including the 2014 European-backed coup in Ukraine, served as a catalyst for confrontation. The US played a significant role in shaping Ukraine's post-2014 government, using the country as a geopolitical chess piece against Russia. The EU, despite its supposed role as an independent power bloc, acted in alignment with U.S. interests rather than pursuing its own strategic autonomy. The sanctions imposed on Russia following the annexation of Crimea disproportionately harmed European economies, particularly Germany, which relied heavily on Russian energy imports. Instead of emerging as a counterbalance to U.S. influence, the EU found itself caught in Washington's foreign policy machinations, bearing the economic and social costs of a prolonged conflict with Russia. The hidden hands behind global control. Despite figures like Christine Anderson calling out the failures of EU policies, there remains a reluctance to acknowledge the deeper forces at play. The influence of financial dynasties such as the Rothschilds and Rockefellers in shaping economic policies, both in Europe and globally, is a topic that few dare to address. Their control over central banking systems and international financial institutions has long dictated the economic direction of nations, including the EU. The Rothschilds, in particular, have wielded immense influence over European economies, using their network of financial institutions to manipulate currency values, debt policies, and national banking systems. By controlling vast amounts of wealth and strategic investments, they have ensured that European nations remain dependent on their financial infrastructure. Additionally, their historical involvement in war financing has allowed them to profit from geopolitical conflicts, further entrenching their power over governments and economies. The Rothschilds and Rockefellers have long understood that war is a lucrative enterprise. By instigating conflicts and then funding both sides, they generate massive profits through arms deals, loans, and post-war reconstruction efforts. The Ukraine war serves as a modern example of this strategy, where financial elites benefit from economic instability and military expenditures while European citizens suffer the consequences. The masters behind the globalist agenda. When some people criticize the World Economic Forum and figures like George Soros, they often overlook the true power behind these organizations. Soros and his networks, while influential, ultimately answer to higher authorities, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, who sit at the top of the globalist hierarchy. These dynasties have orchestrated financial collapses, social engineering projects, and political upheavals to maintain control over global systems. The EU, rather than being a beacon of sovereignty and unity, has become an instrument of this elite cabal. Through financial entrapment, economic warfare, and the deliberate erosion of national identities, they have transformed Europe into a region beholden to their interests. Until this reality is widely acknowledged and challenged, the continent will continue to be a pawn in a much larger game. Conclusion. The European Union, once envisioned as a formidable economic and political entity capable of counterbalancing U.S. dominance, has instead become an instrument of economic stagnation and geopolitical subservience. Manipulated by its own leaders and influenced by global financial elites, the EU has consistently acted against the interests of its citizens. The failure of the euro, the economic disparities within the Union, and the reckless engagement in geopolitical conflicts such as the Ukraine war all point to a fundamental betrayal of the European people. Unless Europe reclaims its sovereignty and acknowledges the hidden forces shaping its destiny, it will continue to be a pawn in a game controlled by external powers.